Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war and broader world geopolitical update. So much to talk to you about today that I thought I had better do a live stream. Apologies if you are having too many live streams. I had one yesterday. I believe, I don't know, I lose count, and I'm doing another one today. I guess without too much further ado, I better get into it because there is indeed so much to talk about. If you want to stay up to date with all of the comings and goings with regard to the Ukraine war and anything else in the world that I deem important enough to talk about, please subscribe to the channel. It will help a lot. And make sure that you do, if you press the bell icon, you select all rather than personalized, and that's all apparently a bit better or something. But thank you to those of you who already have, and thank you for being here in the live stream. If you're not watching this live, where are you? What are you doing? You're doing life wrong. Okay, let's get to the discussion about, well, we're going to start off by just mentioning Steve Witkoff again, only briefly, I promise. So our good friend Steve Witkoff, the golfing buddy of Donald Trump and real estate mogul, and of course all of those characteristics lend themselves to being an excellent negotiator over a huge intractable war and its subsequent, hopefully, peace. Sources in Britain say Bloomberg will release soon more calls from Steve Witkoff. So if you remember, recently Bloomberg released the calls between Steve Witkoff and Ushakov and Kirill Dmitriev and Ushakov, and these were pretty controversial. They were very revealing, I think, and not a little embarrassing for Witkoff, but he seems to have got away with them. But anyway, there are apparently more in the pipeline. If that drops, says Jason J. Smart, it will further weaken Trump's already shaky chances of quick peace for Ukraine. I mean, his chances of quick peace have gone. I mean, we're 10 months in and he said he's going to do it in one day. That's not going to happen. So that boat has sailed. And anyway, and another gift to the butcher in the Kremlin. Personally, I can't wait to hear those phone calls. I think the previous ones were just so revealing. Okay, again, just a little bit about Witkoff. It has happened many times where, this is a quote, it has happened many times where we had coordinated our position with the US, and then Witkoff goes to Moscow, and after seeing Putin, Trump puts out a statement that takes us back to square one, said a senior Ukrainian official in the Financial Times article. That quote is essentially the entire peace negotiations summed up as concisely as possible, which is, we coordinated our position with the US and Europe. We'd all got together. We all agreed. Witkoff goes to Moscow, and then it all completely changes because Putin gets his way with Witkoff, and Witkoff delivers it to Trump, and Trump goes, oh, yeah, I like what Putin says. So, and then you're back to square one. We are presently back to square one now. Just insanely frustrating. Right, I did mention this on a previous video. It was a military aid video yesterday because it pertained to military aid and assistance from the frozen Russian assets to Ukraine from the EU. But I'm going to mention it here from a kind of geopolitical point of view because I honestly think this is so freaking important, and I said as much yesterday. When EU sanctions envoy David O'Sullivan traveled to Washington, according to Politico, during the summer, US officials told him in no uncertain terms that their plan, the US plan, was to return the frozen Russian assets to Russia after the signing of any peace deal. The US does not want Ukraine getting hold of the frozen Russian assets, or at least that was the position in the summer. They wanted Russia to get hold of the frozen Russian assets. The only reason you would want that is if you were aligned with Russia. There is no other reason why you would want that reality to be the case. Just absolutely insane. So yeah, I honestly, that should, if that is all true, that should be massive news. The US was wanting, and one could presume still wants, Russia to get hold of those frozen Russian assets. So it wouldn't be used for reparations, that they wouldn't be used for Ukraine to arm themselves and for their government to function. Apparently, that is not what the US Trump administration wants. Now, talking about these frozen Russian assets, and I know I'll have some Belgian viewers out there, and every time I talk about this, I get Belgians saying, well, actually, I get both sides. Some Belgians saying, yeah, this is not acceptable, and others saying, look, this is a totally bona fide position from the Belgian Prime Minister. And when I report it, I try and sit in the middle and say, well, look, this is what one side said, so this is what the other side said. So I have been trying to do that recently. And it's Rafoglu here, who I rate him as a journalist, but he adopts the, well, there might be reasons that the Belgian government's been difficult. The actual assets are frozen, but the interest they generate is taxed by Belgium at 25%. And that sweet, sweet tax revenue is a massive windfall that they can technically spend however they want, even if they promised it to Ukraine. Pathetic. So that's his position as a journalist. But then we have today, this is Anton Gerashenko reporting how the foreign minister, Maxime Prévost, says Belgium is not satisfied with the legal framework prepared for the reparations loan. That's a foreign minister quote. The text the European Commission will table today do not address our concerns in a satisfactory manner. It's not acceptable to use the money and leave us alone facing the risks. So the criticism here is from the Belgian government is that the EU is just not doing enough to mitigate the risks that seem to be mainly or solely on Belgium here, because the money is held predominantly in Euroclear, which is an entity that operates in Belgium. So if this is the case, then the EU, jeezy crazy, like how long has this been going on? And we're still at this position where the EU apparently is not sorted out sharing the risk for dispersing these frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. Like, that is super frustrating because it's been so bloody long in sorting out. Now, there are some claims today that the EU is going to have some alternatives sorted out. We had Macron talk about this the other day. So, you know, the signals are supposedly fairly good here. The EU today saying some more on that. But I guess, you know, we'll just have to wait and see what emerges. It's so frustrating. Ukraine needs that money really, really prompto. Now, although I'm not going to show you what he said to the Irish Parliament, but when Zelensky was in Ireland yesterday, meeting Witkoff and Kushner before they went to Kremlin. Remember, they went to, so if you haven't watched my peace negotiations update, you had the negotiations taking place between the Ukrainians and Americans in Miami and Florida. Then Witkoff and Kushner flew to the Kremlin, but they stopped off in Ireland. Zelensky and Umarov had a chat to those two in Ireland, obviously to make sure that, you know, they knew what they're saying with regard to Ukraine. Then Kushner and Witkoff went to the Kremlin, and I guess were just manipulated by Putin. And we know that they were manipulated by Putin because the claim was they're supposed to be coming back via Brussels to meet with Zelensky again. But Putin told Witkoff and Kushner that they shouldn't be allowed to go back, or they shouldn't go back to Brussels. They should go straight to Washington without meeting Zelensky. And that's exactly what they did. And frustratingly, Kushner and Witkoff did exactly what Putin told them to do and went straight back to Washington and cancelled the meeting with Zelensky. I think if that is true, that tells you all you need to know about the American delegation. So while Zelensky was in Ireland, though, he did speak to their parliament and got a really warm, astonishingly warm, it says here. Zelensky says Tim White received an astonishingly warm, almost adoring ovation as he was welcomed in the chamber to address Ireland's parliament in person for the first time. It's little things that I think is important, because I do worry about fatigue with Zelensky, whether people around the world are still that bothered about Ukraine, whether parliaments are still as warmly receptive to him as they were, say, in 2022, 2023. If he's still getting warm receptions, that is a really good sign. Ukraine's First Lady Olena watched from the benches. Here is the president's speech, but I'm not going to play that to you. But I think it was good that he got to go to Ireland. Now we're going to talk about like the headline news from my sort of thumbnail. So this is a bit of an expanded section on oil and hydrocarbons, because I think it requires a little bit of looking into. So remember I talked to you about how Ukraine was being a bit risky with striking at tankers, maybe striking at tankers. It depends who owns the tankers. If they are third party owned, then you can see that's a bit dodgy. But if they're Russian shadow tankers, I have no problem with that. But things like the Caspian Petroleum Consortium, that could be seen as, because that's a Kazakhstan thing can be seen as a bit dodgy. Now, Kazakhstan has got pretty angry. They protested the pipeline strike. Ukraine asks why Astana, so that's the capital of Kazakhstan, never condemned Russia's bombing of Ukrainian homes, power plants, and nuclear facility substations. 73% of Kazakh oil flows through Russian pipelines. The silence makes sense. Yeah, I mean, there is actually a bit of a logical inconsistency there with what Ukraine is demanding, because actually this is Kazakhstan saying, look, we own this stuff. There's some of this that you're blowing up as our stuff, whereas the Russians are blowing up things in Ukraine, like, that's not our stuff. So at least there is a consistency there from Kazakhstan, although you would like them to condemn the bombing of Ukrainian civilians, right? So there is definitely a point that Ukraine has, but actually there is to logically analogize those strikes in the way that Ukraine is doing that, I think is actually doesn't quite work. But the point is still I think valid enough. But I guess they're going to have to watch what they do with Kazakhstan-owned oil and pipes and infrastructure. Now, Kazakhstan has urged Ukraine to stop the strikes on an oil terminal in Novorossiysk, says Reuters, after the series of drone attacks in and around there. The country's foreign ministry said that this was a third attack on the terminal, which, according to them, is an, quote, exclusively civilian facility, the activities of which were protected by international law. Will Ukraine be more careful with the CPC? I don't know. It is a risk for them, but I don't have nearly as much of an issue. I'm unsure about how I feel about the CPC there, but certainly with Russian shadow tankers, I don't have an issue. Russia has failed for the second time in a row to secure a seat at the Council of the UN's International Maritime Organization. Quote, based on the results of the vote in which 169 176 IMO members took part, the Russian Federation was not elected to the council. That's really good. I like to see that. Our country, Ukraine, received 87 votes, more than half the countries that voted, which is 7 votes more than in the previous elections in 2023. Oh, no, that's Russia, sorry. Russia said in the statement, the London-based organization is responsible for regulating the safety and security of international shipping and preventing pollution. Russia applied to category A, which is reserved for states with the greatest interest in providing international shipping services, but was the only candidate rejected among the 11 states. Now, why this is important is because Russia will be hoping to transport oil in their shadow fleet, and of course the shadow fleet is made up oftentimes of old and dodgy vessels that will fail on environmental legislation, health and safety legislation, and then them being on the IMO, I think, would be counterproductive, and I think they can be held to account much more. It's a bit like Russia being on the Security Council at the UN. But anyway, there you go. Remember that Viktor Orbán went to meet Putin recently, and he took with him Peter Shihata as foreign minister, also transport minister, and NSA, is that security? I don't know. The EU was not informed about that, but there is that exemption that still exists for, and we're going to be looking at this in a second, for Hungary and Slovakia, and they are still able, given permission by the United States, by Trump, who keeps having to go at Europe for buying Russian oil and gas. It is Orbán and Fico, his two mates, that have got exemptions that do most of that buying. So it's just absolutely infuriating that Trump has given them that exemption. Now, the EU is adding Russia to its blacklist of countries at high risk of money laundering and financing terrorism, according to Politico. The EU is finally blacklisting Russia for money laundering. Wow, the move, I would have thought that would have been done much earlier, but the move will oblige financial institutions to strengthen due diligence on all transactions, and that is good news. So, another form of tightening of the noose around the neck of the financial neck, the economic neck of Russia. Now, the Romanian government has approved a decision that will allow it to take control of Lukoil's assets. Now, we know that since November the 21st, the US is fully sanctioning both Lukoil and Rosneft, and they have given a little bit of dispensation for nations to, or for those entities to divest their assets and whatnot. Romanian government has approved a decision that will allow them to take control of those assets. Romania's coalition government has approved a resolution that allows it to take control of local assets of companies under international sanctions, including Russia's Lukoil. Lukoil has 320 gas stations in Romania, operates the third largest oil refinery, and holds exploration rights to the Black Sea shelf. The refinery, which supplies about a quarter of the country's fuel, has been undergoing maintenance in recent weeks. I wonder whether this is just a great opportunity for Romania to nationalize some cash cow entities. That's probably really good for, I know nationalization of industries is not everyone's cup of tea, but in these times of economic hardship, with an industry that's fairly lucrative, I guess it makes sense for the nation to take it under control and reap the rewards in terms of tax benefits and whatnot. Now, the EU is officially ending all Russian gas imports by 2027. This is very significant because an awful lot of LNG is still bought by Europe. And I was just having a chat with Benny Pie and others offline, and I've managed to scrabble a couple of things together, just hopefully to discuss why there are certain countries, not just Slovakia and Hungary, that are buying LNG from Russia. So we're going to look at that. The new agreement sets for phase-out deadlines for LNG and pipeline gas, imposes penalties, and demands every country submit a diversification plan. Now, that will include Belgium and France. They are big players there, as we will see in a second. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said, "Today is a historic day for our union. Last night, we reached a provisional agreement on the Commission's proposal to fully phase out Russian fossil fuels. We are turning that page. This is the dawn of a new era, the era of Europe's full energy independence from Russia." That's, again, this is good news. This is great. This is what we want to see. Is it long past the day it should have happened? Arguably, yes. I mean, in a very abstract sense, yeah, it would be great if Europe had phased everything out on day one of the war, day two of the war. But the reality is you've got massive contracts that still exist between these countries and these entities, and also reliance on Russia for fuel that you can't just cut off, right? Because it's not like if you're buying, gajillions of cubic meters of gas or liquefied natural gas off Russia, like that capacity doesn't exist like that elsewhere around the world. So there's one thing saying, yeah, we're going to stop buying Russian stuff, but there's another thing saying, and we're going to do it tomorrow. It just does. The reality is it takes a long time, or longer than we would like, for the EU to wean themselves off Russian hydrocarbons. However, the flip side is, have they still taken too long? Why is France still buying? Why is Belgium still buying an awful lot of LNG? Nations have done a pretty good job of getting off oil. And then, of course, you've got the issue of India and China buying an awful lot of hydrocarbons, and then Europe buying the refined products. So you're still sort of buying Russian hydrocarbons. You're just laundering it, if you like, through India and China. So lots to consider here. Now, the CREA, Centre for Research on Energy and Clean Air, have come out with their October 2025 monthly analysis of Russian fossil fuel exports and sanctions. The key findings here are worth looking. We're just going to read the key findings and then go look at some of the graphs, actually. So in October 2025, Russia's monthly fossil fuel export revenues saw a 4% month-on-month decline to 524 million euros per day, the lowest they've been since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So that's really good. So export revenue is down, but of course, a lot of this will depend on the price of these fossil fuels, right? So it might not be the sheer volume that has been hit, but it could be the revenues are hit by prices. G7 plus tankers transported 38% of Russian crude oil exports. So although the G7's fairly hard on Russia, they are still responsible for transporting 38% of Russian crude oil exports. Non-sanctioned shadow tankers, so these are the shadow fleet. The shadow fleet is this amorphous kind of bunch of vessels that Russia has some kind of control over. and many of them are sanctioned individually by name. So the EU, the UK, Canada, Australia, the US, all these different nations and groups have sanctioned a number of these vessels. Some of these vessels are sanctioned by all of those entities. It's a bit of patchwork quilt, probably, in reality. Anyway, some of these shadow fleet tankers haven't been sanctioned. The non-sanctioned tankers are responsible for 18% of Russian fossil fuel exports, or crude oil exports, and the largest share, 44%, was carried out by sanctioned shadow tankers. Now, it's not that it's illegal to transport Russian crude oil. It's just sanctions are not like law. The way I understand it is like you can sanction them as countries, which is to say we are not going to allow those ships to come to our ports, and we're not going to allow us to buy that stuff. But it doesn't mean it's illegal to buy that stuff. It just means that we're not going to have that come to our ports. But then it gets a bit more complicated, because London has been particularly involved in maritime insurance, because there's a near monopoly in London. So you have like Lloyd's of London, etc., etc. And the British quite early on were like, okay, one of the things, and this is to do with the oil price cap, we are going to say that if you're transporting this stuff, you're not insured, which is why it then went all kind of underground, transponders getting turned off, and you're not quite sure who's got the oil, and it's transshipment, and then it's going from this ship to that ship in the middle of nowhere with transponders turned off, and so on and so forth. But anyway, 44% of that is carried by sanctioned shadow tankers, because they can still operate, I guess, in places, India, China, still taking them. And unless, you put pressure on India and China in terms of secondary sanctions, if you buy that stuff, then we'll sanction you. That's what the Blumenthal and Lindsey Graham bill that still hasn't got through the Senate is designed to do. And that's how you affect other countries taking on these shadow tankers. The EU's 5 largest importers paid 938 million euros for fossil fuels. Natural gas, unsanctioned by the EU. So natural gas is not sanctioned by the EU, accounts for 2/3 of these imports, delivered mainly by pipeline. So that's through to Slovakia and Hungary, or as LNG, liquefied natural gas, turning it into liquid form, and then you can whack it on tankers and move it around much more easily in a condensed form. So the EU, Australia, UK, and US imported 971 million euros of refined products from Indian and Turkish refineries using Russian crude oil. That's the key. That's how you get around it. Now, I don't mind that as much, because, as I've said to you many times before, if the Turkish and Indian refineries are adding the value, you don't mind the money going to Turkey or Russia, especially if the price of crude oil is so low that the Russians are selling it either at a loss or near a loss, or making only nominal profits. So it's not too bad, because it's still then on the, this is the idea that oil price cap is, you still want the Russian oil to be on the global market, because otherwise it'll be a massive inflationary pressure on energy, and that will mean that everyone will be hurt in their pockets by Russian oil not being on the market. You want it on the market, but being sold at cripplingly low prices. And if that's still the case, and they get that oil to the Turkish or Indian refineries, and we buy refined stuff that's essentially Russian crude oil, we buy that back into Europe, I don't have too much of an issue with that, as long as most of that value is being is going to those other nations and not going to Russia. An estimated 443 million euros of these products was refined from Russian crude. Australia and the US imports from these refineries saw 140% and 17% month-on-month increase, respectively. In other words, the US is also, buying more refined goods that come through other nations from Russia. So we need to be careful when Trump has a go at other nations, because there's an element of that happening in the US. Now, in October, the EU and UK sanctioned Vladimir refineries' imports from Russia increased 32% month on month to their highest volumes since the full-scale invasion. So that's a bit of a shame. A lower pricing cap of $30 per barrel. So if they put $30 a barrel when they first introduced the price cap, That would have slashed Russia's oil export revenue by 40% from the start of the EU sanctions in December 2022 until the end of October 2025. In October alone, a US dollar $30 a barrel price cap would have slashed Russian revenues by 36%. Now, that didn't happen. They went for a more modest approach, but could have been way more damaging to Russia. Then there's loads in here, by the way, but we're just going to concentrate on this. So who bought Russia's fossil fuels in October 2025? Hungary in the EU. This is so the top 5. It says regions in the countries in the EU. Hungary bought the most, made up of, I guess that's like a third crude oil and 2/3 pipeline gas. So they're getting actual gas, natural gas in from Russia. Then you've got Slovakia, probably 4/5 crude oil and 1/5 pipeline gas is in second place. Then you've got France, and then you've got Belgium, and then Romania with pipeline gas as well. That probably, I assume that comes through Hungary and Slovakia. I'm not sure though. But France and Belgium are still taking on huge amounts of LNG. What is going on there? That is a bit controversial. Some people are saying that's not cool. What the hell is going on? Now, bear in mind that the EU has officially said that all Russian gas imports will be ended by 2027, which I assume means by January the 1st, which would entail that next year France and Belgium would reduce LNG imports from Russia to 0. Hungary and Slovakia have a 1-year exemption, and Romania, I don't know that Romania does have an exemption, but nonetheless, there you go. You've got Romania, of course, nationalizing the Lukoil infrastructure there. So that may, I don't know how that would affect the stats. So what we're going to look at now is I've just come up with this publication, European Conservative, fact-checking Europe still buys Russian energy. There's quite a lot in here that you can look through. The LNG map reveals the gateways and the inertias that complicate the exit timetable. France, Dunkirk, and Belgium, Zeebrugge, operate as entry and re-export nodes toward Germany and the Netherlands. Spain maintains purchases lower than in 2024, a record year for Russian LNG in Europe, while the Netherlands appears as a regular recipient. In other words, when you go back to this chart, it's very easy to blame France and Belgium, and we should to some degree. However, that's not to say France and Belgium are buying that LNG themselves. So they are the entry points for the Russian LNG, but then they re-export it to the Netherlands, to other countries as well, Germany, etc., etc. So one must be very careful in just leveling the blame at Belgium and France. It's probably the EU more largely. Now, I was looking on, and I remember one reason as to why France and Belgium was still buying LNG. And when I reported on this, but that's probably going back a year and a half, maybe 2 years even, I can't remember. In fact, Benny Pie says, I can't remember you talking about this. And I've talked about this, but it would have been there for a long time ago. One of the reasons was they had, and I don't know if this is still the case, but just long-term contracts that you can't just tear up unless it's written into that you can tear it up if there's a war and the other person's at fault. So it's easy to say, right, you need to stop buying this, but then Russia will say, well, yeah, but you've got a 15-year contract on that, and if you just tear up the contract and stop buying, we're going to sue you. And actually, it will stand up in a court of law because you're breaking international law by not buying this LNG off us. So there may well be contractual obligations that can't be got out of that easily. But anyway, going back to this article, Russian crude enters mainly through the southern branch of the Druzhba pipeline and moves toward Hungary and Slovakia. Turkstream, the only major direct route still operating, shapes Central Europe supply. After maintenance in June, flows rebounded in July, a sign that dependence has not disappeared. Country by country, the 2025 picture is uneven. Hungary and Slovakia refine Russian crude oil via the Druzhba pipeline, and Budapest ranks as the top monthly payer. France is now the largest gateway for Russian LNG. Remember, that's a gateway, not necessarily like buying and using it all. With some re-exported to Northern Europe. That's the point. Belgium acts as a logistics hub with transshipment contracts under the scrutiny of the new rules. Spain has reduced its exposure to Russian LNG compared to 2024, while the United States gains share as a supplier. We looked at that in the previous document. The Netherlands and Germany show limited direct exposure, but receive Russian molecules via re-exports and regional swaps. So essentially, everyone will bear the brunt of shifting. Well, not everyone, but it's not just going to be France and Belgium. Like France and Belgium are the logistics hubs for this stuff, but it goes to the Netherlands, it goes to elsewhere in Europe, and everyone will be responsible for minimizing or for reducing the reliance on and the demand of Russian hydrocarbons. The question is, and then what? Okay, it might be like a bit ramping up your nuclear, ramping up your renewables. Okay, that's good for carbon. That's good, actually. That's what we want to do. They're all coming down in prices as well. So, yeah, you might see a bit of that. But then really, you're going to be looking for LNG imports from elsewhere around the world. And of course, the US is going to be going, hi, guys, remember us? Yeah, we'd like to make a lot of money off this. Thank you very much. So and they have done already. So the US LNG exports have been doing very well. Thank you very much. So, yeah, this needs to happen. I'm glad that the EU is putting things formally in place now for this to happen. And it's going to happen by 2027. So this next year is going to be pivotal. Could it have happened earlier? I'm sure it could have done. And I'm sure there are criticisms we could level at the EU there. So here, right, Ronin Rugby, good to have you on board, mate. As an Albertan, for those who don't know, that's Canada, the United States of Canada. As an Albertan, Texas North, I can tell you that refineries take 5 to 15 years to be constructed. If Ukraine continues to target these, how do you think this will impact their future? Well, I mean, I've had Will Teal on several times now, and this is hurting Russia. And each time you're wondering whether you are hurting these refineries long term. Like they can fix it up, but maybe they fix it up to a point where the output isn't as much as it was previously. And then each successive fixing up hits it. I don't know. That's a bit of a supposition there. But the Ukrainians are doing an absolutely fabulous job of sanctioning the Russians in a very direct manner. That needs to continue. And as we see, I think more missile and drone capability come online and capacity come online. I think the capability is there. It's just the capacity now. November had the highest number of refineries hit. I think it's 14 refineries hit in November. That tells you something. Okay, so already last month was a record month for hitting refineries. I'm sure that will continue and arguably could get even worse. Last night, December the 3rd, so into the 2nd, we had Tambov was hit, an oil depot there. We've got refinery as well in Oriel over the last couple of nights, and another refinery last night as well was hit too. Ifipsky was hit as well, I think. So yeah, it's super hurt the Russians on a continued basis there. Right, getting back to where I was. So Europe, says the Euromaidan Press, reduced its reliance on Russian energy, but two lucrative routes remain: LNG shipments to France and Belgium, as we've seen, and gas via Turkstream. A new report explains how these channels survived sanctions and why Moscow fears losing them. So probably I should read as to why they have remained. But of course, if they lose them, if Russia loses them, of course, they're going to lose an awful lot of money. The scale of that flow, 216 billion euros since February 2022. So this is coming from, I don't know which one that is. Anyway, there's a lot of money involved here, and I probably need to look into why that they have remained. So that's an article for me to read in more depth rather than right now when I'm speaking to you. Now, Kremlin's energy maneuvers. Russia and Vietnam have organized a scheme to bypass the price ceiling for Russian oil. So Russia is trying all of the ways it can to get around these issues for, concerning nations' reliance on Russian hydrocarbons. Here they are working with, the sanctions really. Here they're working with Vietnam. Russia and Vietnam have organized a scheme to bypass a price ceiling on Russian oil. The package of documents provides for the expansion of joint oil and gas production on Russian territory and a Vietnamese shelf. So I wonder whether what happens here is the Vietnamese, in this example, get involved in extracting in Russia, and it's not like Russian crude, it's Vietnamese crude. Maybe in name only. Vietnamese and Russian entities will receive additional licenses to develop new subsoil areas in the Nenets Autonomous Okrug in Russia and extend the terms of existing licenses until 2050. Particularly significant is the establishment of the Russian-Vietnamese agreement on the minimum oil sales, and this is pretty staggering. So they have sorted out a price of no less than $75 per barrel. We're just talking about sanctions should have been put at $30 a barrel. We are now seeing Urals probably trending around mid-40s per barrel at the moment. I don't know. It's been around there recently. So if this oil is being ring-fenced in terms of how much what the price will be, if that's $75 a barrel, then Russia is laughing. Significantly higher than the price ceiling of $47.6 per barrel that the European Union countries have introduced in July 2025. And I wonder what pressure the EU and allied nations might put onto Vietnam over that. Right. Despite the numerous sanctions against Russian energy companies, banks, military suppliers, and the shadow fleet, there are still invisible vulnerabilities that often go unnoticed. This is a Guardian article that Anton Gerashenko's picked out a quote, Decleptocracy, a civil society group that researches Russia's war economy, says chemicals used to make mechanical oils and military-grade tires are a vulnerability that the US, UK, and EU policymakers could exploit. The idea is that they haven't exploited them, so these are unsanctioned as of yet. These chemical products are hard to replace and essential to Moscow's ability to field tanks and fight. Russia's domestic chemical sector is weak, forcing it to rely on imports. Cutting off the supply of these key products could significantly slow down or disrupt Russia's ability to wage war. Sanctions are not only about big, high-profile targets, energy, banks, the shadow fleet, but also about the hidden supply chains behind them. The very fact that such bottlenecks are being identified is important, and it shows that the list of potential targets can still be expanded. So there's potential for lots more products to be sanctioned. Now, moving off that, so hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview as to what's going on with regard to hydrocarbons, Russian hydrocarbons, and how the EU is still somewhat reliant on them, but is moving away, and how much work there still is to do. Latvia, before I get onto that, actually, it's probably worth my while just having a look at what you guys have said. Okay, this is what Benny Pie's working in the background to see if there are any worthy comments for me to get my teeth into. Daniel Doherty says, from a fellow Englishman and Brit, yes, nice one, mate. Because as we know, like we are culturally superior, aren't we, to everyone else? Oh no, we're just always the bad guys in Star Wars movies and things. That's it. I want to thank you again, Jonathan, for your superb and absolutely tireless work for Ukraine. Your incredible work is so important, mate. Slava Ukraini. Benny Pie's just, that's not a question. Now it seems like I'm just highlighting my awesomeness or something. No, thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate your support there, mate. Viggo Holmson, so good to have Viggo on board, as it always is. A lot of the claims and assertions floating around concerning the frozen assets in Belgium are simply false. I wonder what claims you particularly mean there. And Who's Poppin' says, mixing your own oil with unsanctioned oil is a very clever way at avoiding said sanctions. I wonder how much of that happens. Back to Viggo. The US is also putting itself first in line to purchase any Lukoil and Rosneft assets being divested. Yes, it wouldn't surprise me. Like, I'm sure that when Trump agreed to sanction Rosneft and Lukoil, that the people who were convincing him to actually sign that off were saying, by the way, if you do this, A, we can sell an absolute ton or gazillion tons of liquefied natural gas. So we're going to make money off that. And also, if our hedge funds and our financial entities can get in line to buy some of these Rosneft and Lukoil assets, then we're going to make even more money. Like, the main driver of Trump's behavior is how much money can we make off that. So although Rosneft and Lukoil, the sanctioning of these two companies was absolutely brilliant, like, well done, Trump, for doing that. A, it should have been done much earlier, but B, like, the idea that he's doing that for the benefit of Ukraine, I think is probably naive. There may be other people in the Trump administration that have that in mind, but when you try and convince Trump to sign those documents, you've got to convince him that it's transactional. There's a net gain, there's a zero-sum game, and as Russia loses, we in the US win. That's a zero-sum game approach that Trump thrives on. So yeah, absolutely there. Vigo then adds, there was a news piece in the last half hour signaling some movement by Belgium on the disposition of the assets, the dispersal. Right, interesting. Thanks. Keep me posted. Like, I'm keeping you posted, and while I'm keeping you posted, you're keeping me posted, and it's some kind of circular situation there. Yes, and final sort of comment for now before we go on. This is coming from Benny Pie. He says, by the way, we're on Facebook now, ATP Geopolitics. We will be kicking off automatic posts, including live stream alerts in the next few days. 32 followers so far. Go and find us on Facebook. We're trying to sort out a way, because Benny Pie is a bit of a genius. Just to let you know, a bit of housekeeping. We're trying to sort a way, because I spend an awful lot of time personally, myself, no one else, me as JP, I go through YouTube comments to obscene degrees, like always on my phone looking at comments and reacting to them. That is just me. So whenever you get a reaction, it is invariably going to be me. But I would like to have, I've only got so many hours in a day, right? And I'm already exhaustingly like overworked. We're trying to work out a way of me being able to look at comments from all these different places without me having to go to those different places, so they all come to one area, and then I can react to people and have that personal connection with you guys, because I think that's really important. Like, so we're going to be trying out some things with regard to all these different places where we're going to be hanging out. But anyway, I'll let you know how that goes. Right now, no laws on the planet force you to pay for a jumper like that. I'm deeply, deeply hurt. I'm deeply hurt by that, King Raccoon. Deep. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's almost Christmas, right? It's December the 3rd. I mean, before you know it, it'd be Christmas Day. Just getting in the mood, mate. Just being a bit positive, being a bit, because nothing says Christmas like a 1970s retro Christmas jumper. Anyway, moving on from that just absolutely outrageous comment from King Raccoon, who will be banished from all things ATP Geopolitics forever and a day. Obviously not. Latvia considers dismantling railway lines to Russia. The Latvian government is seriously weighing the option of fully dismantling the railway tracks leading into Russia. President Edgars Rinkēvičs and Prime Minister Ivica Silina announced this after their weekly meeting, according to LSM. The reason is straightforward. Tension on Latvia's eastern border remain a long-term concern, and the authorities are looking at radical solutions. Removing the tracks, says Nexter, is one of the options now being prepared for discussion among the leaders of all Baltic states. So there are many ways in which nations can sort of punish Russia and cut them off and let them become this pariah state more formally. Armenia has effectively left the CSTO, which is essentially the kind of a NATO UN sort of equivalent to NATO UN of the Eurasian countries and whatever. So Armenia has left it. The country's National Assembly President Simonyan has said, effectively left it in all but name. We have effectively left. As for the rest, leave it to our political expediency and negotiations, he said. commenting on the question of why Yerevan, that's a capital which does not participate in CSTO events, hasn't announced its withdrawal. Simonyan also said that leaving the alliance doesn't mean being anti-Russian. So that's an interesting positioning, messaging on that. Now, the EU is preparing sanctions against Belarus over hybrid attacks on Lithuania, these balloons that keep going over and closing down airports. Such hybrid attacks by the Lukashenko regime are absolutely unacceptable. We are preparing further measures within our sanctions regime, said the head of the European Commission. Good news there. Lukashenko, as a dictator in Belarus, is the lapdog of Vladimir Putin. Now, Chinese Vice Premier Deng Xiang says, quote, China is willing to work with Russia to further implement the important consensus reached by the two heads of state, continuously deepen strategic cooperation in the energy sector, and constantly open up new prospects for a win-win cooperation. In other words, Russia are still deeply associated with China is deeply associated with Russia. They're in bed together, and nothing says it more than what Shui Xiang has just said. Although we do hear that Russia has stopped building a new railway line into China because they've run out of money. Another sign that Russia is in financial difficulty. Anyway, that seems to be pretty pertinent to me. Now, the Danish government has set up a night watch. I love the Jon Snow. I love the Game of Thrones reference there, in the foreign ministry to monitor Donald Trump's pronouncements and movements while Copenhagen sleeps, The Guardian has reported. So, in other words, because of the time difference, Donald Trump says and does mental stuff in the afternoon, evening time in the US, but of course, everyone in Denmark's asleep. So they set up a night watch to just keep an eye on how mental Donald Trump is. From a governmental point of view. And that goes to show what the international opinion of Donald Trump actually is. Now, let's talk a little bit about NATO. A war game in Transylvania. It was Rocky Horror Picture Show's 50th anniversary recently. I watched a whole bunch of stuff on that film. Absolute classic. And some fascinating factoids about the film and the cultural impact it had, and the subversive underground culture existed, going to the showings on a Saturday night or whatever. Anyway, that's nothing to do with anything. That's Transylvania, right? A war game in Transylvania showed European soldiers under French command defending the continent largely without the US. Bloomberg reports the US has reduced its military presence in Europe. European officials have expressed concerns about their ability to defend themselves without US backing. So that's Europe's ability to defend themselves. So NATO is preparing to confront Russia with limited US support. Wow. Is this the end of NATO as we see it? I don't know, or the beginning of the end. Now, Scott Bessent, maybe it is, because this is what Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, has just said.
But now Putin has started making incursions, into the NATO borders.
Exactly.
So the one thing I can tell you is the U.S. is not going to get involved with troops or any of that. We will sell the Europeans weapons, but now Putin has started making incursions,
So we will sell weapons, but now Putin started making incursions into NATO borders. One thing I can tell you is the US is not going to get involved with troops or any of that. We will sell the Europeans weapons. As someone says here, NATO is gone. Wow. And Trump didn't turn up to the G20 recently in South Africa. Here, Donald Trump says the following. This is what he said. I haven't had a chance to share this with you. This is all the way back on November the 28th. The United States did not attend the G20 in South Africa because the South African government refuses to acknowledge or address horrific human rights abuses endured by Afrikaners, in other words, white South Africans, and other descendants of Dutch, French, and German settlers. To put it more bluntly, they are killing white people and randomly allowing their farms to be taken from them. Perhaps worst of all, the soon-to-be out of business New York Times and the fake news media won't issue a word against this genocide. That's why all the liars and pretenders of the radical left media are going out of business. At the conclusion of the G20, South Africa refused to hand off to the G20 presidency to a senior representative from the US Assembly, from our US Assembly, who attended the closing ceremony. Therefore, at my direction, South Africa will not be receiving an invitation to the 2026 G20, which will be hosted in the great city of Miami, Florida next year. South Africa has demonstrated to the world that they are not a country worthy of membership anywhere. And we are going to stop all payments and subsidies to them effective immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter. My God, Donald Trump is an absolute dick. But I have to say, this sounds like it's written by Stephen Miller. And we had this whole thing when the South African president went to the White House and he was ambushed, and they played that video, which was disinformation, and talked about white genocide, which is disinformation. When you look at the murder rates, when you do the fact checking, this is disinformation. There is not genocide taking place in South Africa. So Trump's attack of South Africa here, their refusal to go to the G20, and then punishing South Africa with any payments and subsidies that would otherwise go to them being cancelled, is a result of, I would argue, Stephen Miller pushing a disinformation agenda of white grievance. This is absolutely outrageous. I cannot believe that the Trump administration is this idiotic. Donald Trump is that much of a tool. And if he's not the tool, then he is just regurgitating the toolery of tools like Stephen Miller. Just honestly, it's incredible. Fascism is the new Miller time. Oh, well said, Mark Peterson. Yeah, honestly, incredible. I do despair sometimes, but no, we must be positive, and let's be positive here. A Georgian having a go at a Russian here who has come to shop in his shop. The TikTok here says I presume it's TikTok, how tourists from Russia are welcomed in Georgia. He starts by saying, move out of the way, to the shop, to shop assistant. It says, move out of the way. Slava Ukraini. He just starts off the conversation with a Russian shopper with Slava Ukraini.
Слава Украине! Мы не разговариваем на русском. Can I help you? Don't speak Georgian? No? Occupied?
No.
No?
Русский военный корабль пришел бы ты нахуй. Вся моя краина велика рідна сім'я.
And it sounded like that might have been a Ukrainian song. Anyway, just I thought that was quite amusing, and just like, obviously he's being very difficult to a Russian woman who wants to buy stuff in his shop. Is like, do you speak Georgian? No? Okay. And then puts on a what appears to be a Ukrainian song. Anyway, I thought that was a nice way to finish off the first section of the video today. Now we're going on to a little section on the UK. Before we get onto the US, I don't know if we're going to have time for the US. It depends how long you guys can put up with me banging on. It's probably not that long. Just in the meantime, thanks to Johnny Nevergard. Thank you for your Norwegian love, my friend. Really appreciated. Wizard of Ooze. All I want for Xmas is terrain maps for Yuletide. Terrain maps for Flamingo missiles. That's what we need. Julian Rossiter, yet again, my friend, the deal between Russia and China is very Faustian. You can see Russia slowly bleeding out, then China just walks back into Manchuria. They would then border North Korea and have strategic access in the Pacific. Right, first of all, Julian, thank you very much for the super chat. Second of all, completely agree. Now, I said right at the beginning of the war, and many of you who are long-time supporters, I don't know if any of you remember my videos right at the beginning of the war, but anyway, I used to say that China wouldn't mind if Russia lost this war. I don't think China are particularly aligned to Russia in any significant ideological way. China are very transactional and very much about looking after the food and the energy of 1 billion people. And if Russia were to lose the war, I think China would be in a perfect position to go in and say, oh, guys, can we help? Can we pick you up off the floor? We'll help you. Come on, let me help you stand up. Oh, but just Manchuria over there. You didn't see that, did you? Oh, these are oil refineries. You want a little bit of a hand? The West you didn't like the West too much with their operations in there, but we'll help you out. And I honestly think that they wouldn't mind Russia completely losing this war, because they would just help themselves to territory and assets in Russia. Russia is already a vassal state of China, but then you've got to understand Russia's position with China is that they are actually wary of China. There's no love lost between the two. Russia have war gamed China invading. If you look at where Russian air defenses were positioned before the war, it was all about the Chinese border, right? So Russia also understand that China would be wanting to do that, and their generals have throughout this war been sounding warning alarms about Russia becoming more and more of a vassal state. You look at how many Chinese cars are on the road in Russia, and how the Russian cars are just rebadged Chinese cars, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a complex relationship between the two, but I do really think that that China would gain whether Russia won or lost this war, and I think they can afford. I guess on balance they would gain more if Russia won, and that's why they're supporting Russia in those ways. But I don't think they're that concerned to the point where they would stop supporting Russia. But I think that relationship's a really interesting one. Right, let's get on with going to look at what's going on in the UK. Now, oh my goodness, you might say, stop talking about Brexit. Now, interesting things going on with regard to Brexit and the UK and Europe and our government. Our government's under lots of pressure from media. And our budget just recently is a great example of this, where everyone's going to town on the government, but actually the markets have reacted really well. And in general, the budget isn't like disastrous. And there are certain indicators that there are some economic situations that are slightly better than we thought they might have been, and blah, blah, blah. But one thing that is being talked about an awful lot is a shortfall from Brexit. And there are two, Stanford University and the Commons Library came out with two reports, one of which said the UK is losing £90 billion in tax revenue from Brexit every single year. Now, why this is then coming up a lot is because we would like that money back. Thank you very much. We would like to have that income back in our coffers. How do we go about doing that? Do we get closer to Europe in all the ways we can without formally rejoining? What does it say about customs union? We've tried to get close in terms of defense with regard to Ukraine, to try and have access to the safe funding for weapons for Ukraine and the rearming of Europe. There are some people that are calling for Keir Starmer because Labour are looking like they're going to be in a lot of trouble in the next election with the rise of right-wing populism. They need to differentiate themselves. They need to have a clear vision of what the UK, where the UK is going. They could possibly re-embrace re-embrace Europe and go for a rejoin approach. Interestingly, Keir Starmer recently at an evening engagement actually spent 4 minutes talking about how damaging Brexit was to our economy, and that actually a lot of this scaremongering, that as fear-mongering as people said it was, is coming true now. And you're starting to see that being communicated much more explicitly in the political circles. And what's fascinating is even the Daily Telegraph the other day, the Daily Telegraph, or as we call it in the UK sometimes, the Tory graph, it was a very pro-Brexit newspaper and continues to be so. But even in the newspaper now, you're getting pieces like this. Time to admit the truth. Brexit has been an unmitigated economic failure. That was a really big article, an opinion piece, albeit. But when the Telegraph, the house paper of Brexit, says Liz Webster, publishes a 2,000-word obituary admitting Brexit has cut UK GDP by up to 8%, investments down 18%, productivity is down 4%, employment down 4%, no trade benefits, no regulatory freedom, no immigration control, and no growth. It's over. This isn't Remainers talking. This is a Telegraph saying Brexit has been an unmitigated economic failure. The numbers are now so bad, so undeniable, that even the architects of the project can't keep pretending. Brexit wasn't a reset, it wasn't sovereignty, it wasn't taking back control. It was a slow economic strangulation, a textbook case of national self-harm, dragging investment, wages, growth and confidence down with it. We can't build a future on a foundation of lies. Time to repair the damage, time to rejoin the single market, time to put the country first. You are going to see pressures from different people for the UK to rejoin the customs union, the single market, in some way that we can access that single market in Europe, maybe without being a fully paid up member, but some kind of other agreement. Honestly, like, I will keep talking about it because it is talked about an awful lot now, and much more explicitly than it used to be. There is a much greater acceptance that economically Brexit has been a disaster for the UK. All the reports are coming out and saying that. Now, talking about one of the architects, and we're going to get back to Russia in a second, a quick reminder of who Nigel Farage was most concerned about when Putin's tanks first rolled into Ukraine. So remember, this is just a reminder that back in 2022 on GB News, Nigel Farage was complaining about the government sanctioning Russian oligarchs. Quote, Nigel Farage, quote, beginning of the war, quote, is it right to seize people's assets without any form of due process? And will it really turn Russians against Vladimir Putin? I'm concerned about the way this is being done. And of course, Nathan Gill's just gone down for 10.5 years for saying exactly the same things as Nigel Farage at exactly the same time as Nigel Farage and in exactly the same places as Nigel Farage. Nathan Gill took £40,000 for doing so. Nigel Farage says the same stuff. No investigation. Why did he say that? We need an investigation. Now, a recent petition that I was talking about a week or so ago has got over 100. It's an official government petition. It's got over 100,000 signatures, which means that they need to discuss, I think, in Parliament now, that there should be a national investigation into Russian interference in UK elections. Now, when Rachel Reeves was giving her budget, which has caused so much controversy recently, she's still got to dig in, and I love this. I'm just going to play you this because I think it's great.
And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are ramping up sanctions on Russia, and we are freezing known Russian assets. But let me be clear, I don't actually mean the honourable member for Clacton.
So that is just brilliant. So we're freezing Russian assets, known Russian assets, but let me be clear, I don't actually mean the honourable member for Clacton. That is Nigel Farage. We're not freezing Nigel Farage, even though he's a known Russian asset, is the implication. I just love that. And well done, Reeves, for that. Now, that whole Russian connection to reform has got even worse. Right, or the more is coming out. So another former member of European Parliament from Farage's party. So remember, it's UKIP, then Brexit, then Reform, Brexit Party, then Reform. You had Nathan Gill and all those three, and you had other people that Gill was trying to convince, and other people who were saying similar stuff. Another former MEP from Nigel Farage's party was named as a target for Russian corruption in court papers the BBC has seen following the jailing of Nathan Gill for accepting bribes from Moscow. David Coburn denies taking Russian blood money. Both jailed Gill and David Coburn, who denies taking the cash, were appointed to the new international editorial board for two pro-Russian broadcasters in Ukraine, alongside Oleg Voloshin, who prosecutors say paid Gill. The now banned channels were owned by Putin's mate Medvedchuk. So you have Gill joining the editorial board and saying these things because he was paid, and David Coburn joining the editorial board and saying these things. Why? Like, surely there should be an investigation into him, just as there should be into Nigel Farage. Here's UKIP's former Scottish leader, David Coburn, who was denied taking Russian bribes after being named in a WhatsApp messages between Nathan Gill and a pawn of the Putin administration, being applauded by Gill for arguing against Ukraine's entry to the EU. Now, I'm not going to play this to you, but just for time's sake, but here's David Coburn standing up in the EU in Brussels, saying that Ukraine shouldn't be able to join the EU, and then being applauded by Nathan Gill sitting next to him, who's been put away for 10.5 years for taking £40,000 from Russia, effectively, for saying the sort of things that David Coburn is saying. This is bigger. It is just bigger. a former Scottish MEP, David Coburn, for Nigel Farage's Brexit party has denied taking large payments as part of a pro-Russian influence campaign in the European Parliament. There's no evidence he accepted or received cash, is the claim from BBC Breakfast. But this is becoming bigger. You know, that's her saying, that's her quote on this is becoming bigger. You know, BBC Breakfast having it there. Now, going back to Liz Webster, who's just talking about Brexit, she said, so let's get this straight. A Brexit Party MEP who helped rip the UK out of the EU was named in WhatsApp messages linked to Russian influence network, now lives peacefully in France, anti-Europe, Eurosceptic. He's now living as a Brexit Party MEP, now lives in France. Okay, I get that. Now lives peacefully in France inside the EU. He told everyone else to leave. The hypocrisy is radioactive. So the rot is finally surfacing. She had previously said a former Brexit Party MEP named in WhatsApp messages alongside jailed Reform UK leader Nathan Gill is now denying pro-Russian, blah, 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 blah. This isn't a one-off. Brexit wasn't homegrown. It was infiltrated. Farage built his career on a movement riddled with Russian links. And now the messages and the money trails and the convictions are landing. Sunlight really is hitting the vampires. So while all this was happening, Nigel Farage was seen to be suffering in the polls. There are claims that actually the Reform Party have hit their peak and they're now going down in the polls. Interesting things. Timing, says Carol Cadwallader, one of the people behind kind of this kind of reporting. She's previously, when she was at The Guardian, now for The Nerve. Farage experiencing first signs of actual journalistic scrutiny ever, and he responds by throwing a shed load of money at the right-wing press. So at the same time as this Nathan Gill stuff to do with Russia was surfacing, also you had The Guardian coming out with this really damaging piece on 20 people that went to school with Nigel Farage up until the age of 18, coming out and saying Nigel Farage was massively racist and said egregious things. He's now come out and denied it. But at the same time, Reform UK spent £700,000 on double-page ads in the Telegraph, Times, Sun, Mail, Express and Metro papers. They know that Russia and racism could damage them, and that should be where. And you're starting to see Russia being used as a tool to hit reform with. And I think if I was in charge of the Lib Dems, the Greens, Labour and the Tories, assuming that everyone is going to be against reform, they won't want them to be ruling because they want to be ruling, right? I would be advising Russia, 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 and also racism as well. And we'll come on to that in a second. But here's an example. So Labour Press here, an official kind of Twitter handle, says, so what they're talking about, well, basically, and this is seen as highly controversial, Reform have come out. So previously, the Reform colour is like a turquoise blue. They previously had football shirts, Reform football shirts with the Reform logo on in the teal blue. And then they said, we are now coming out with black shirts. And everyone who's quite critical of Reform being like, you're bringing out black shirts, like black football shirts, but these black and gold, these look like the black shirts of the 1930s. And loads of people are saying this has been really controversial. This is Farage.
2 months ago, we launched the Reform UK Farage 10 football shirts, and we've sold 10,000 of them. A lot of happy people and good money for party funds. Well, now for Christmas, we've got this very, very unique collector's edition produced in this beautiful box. These shirts, I mean, this is the real deal. These shirts are our away strip. They're quite something. And there's only 1,000 of them.
So anyway, these are the black shirts that as I say, they've designed and whatnot. And Labour said, just in case anyone needs a full pricing structure of these new black shirts, £349.99 sterling for these limited edition, or 36,059 rubles, Russian rubles. So the point of me like bringing this up is that one of the sticks to hit Reform with will be Russia. So you've got a joke here saying, well, we've got the Russian ruble price for these new black shirts. Anyway, I just thought that was worth pointing out. Now, I'm going to, this is a 9-minute interview that is absolutely fascinating. And I would love to play it all to you, but obviously you don't want to sit here and listen to the whole thing. This is about the racism charges for Nigel Farage. And I honestly, I think it's so important to get an understanding of really who he is, because yes, he might have said these when he was 14 to 18 or 13 to 18 or whatever, but you know, this is definitely still part of who he is, one would argue, and he's lying about it now. So this has been big in the news in the UK. There's a big Guardian article that came out, including these two people who are just about to be interviewed. We're going to just see a couple of minutes of these guys speaking. Farage has come out and denied that he said any of this with intent, so on and so forth.
The question is, did you ever racially abuse fellow pupils in school?
No,
You've caveated it with a hurtful way.
Not with intent.
What do you mean not with intent? I don't understand what you mean by not with intent. What does that mean?
You wouldn't.
But what does that mean?
No.
No what?
No. I have never directly really tried to go and hurt anybody.
You're opening the door there to perhaps you did it without meaning to offend.
Have I said things 50 years ago that you could interpret as being banter in a playground? You could interpret in the modern light of day in some sort of way, yes. But isn't it funny?
Okay, so you did say stuff to these people then?
I've never directly racially abused anybody. No.
He's never directly racially abused anybody.
So the two people you see there, one of them is a Jewish guy on the left who, and I haven't played you the first sort of 3 minutes or 2 minutes, where he talks about being a kid that was racially abused by Farage, who would come up to him and saying they're going to gas you, and hissing gas chambers and singing this songs about Jews going to gas chambers and whatnot. And the guy next to him wasn't racially abused, but witnessed it all. He's a Belgian kid at the time, or lived in Belgium at the time. And he witnessed it all as someone who was not a victim, but he is like, it definitely happened 100%.
Well, it's just not true. I mean, I've witnessed it as well. Peter, we were good friends at school. He's even sleepover at our house in the past, and I've heard it live. And I've always thought, well, that's strange. Why would you have such a view?
So Jean-Pierre, you weren't the target, you
No.
say, of Nigel Farage's comments, but you witnessed them.
Yes.
Against Peter, any others?
Yeah, I mean, anybody who wasn't white would likely have a comment, and that's for many years. You know, we're talking 13, 14, all the way up to senior school.
So what else did you witness?
Anybody who was not white, would he go up to and go useless, or send them home, or Edward, what's his name, Mosley? He used to say those sort of things, draw NF all over his school books. With
NF, by the way, is National Front. That's literally like the Nazi party in the UK. So draw, and because NF was also his initials, Nigel Farage, he took pride in NF being his initials and also being the initials of the National Front.
Pride, and that's what he used to do. That was, you know, it was just like odd. I mean, I came over from Belgium at the time as 10-year-old. My father was in the military, and mother from Germany, so I had no direct conflicts with Nigel, but it was odd to come to this big school in London and have such an obvious thing.
Playground banter. We all grew up in the late 70s, early 80s. Yeah. I mean, it was harsher back then. Yeah. People said things, there were jokes on television, things about disability, which you absolutely wouldn't say now. Right. But the Nazis were right, and the hissing of the gas chamber. Yeah. I mean,
when you think about it, it's crazy. I mean, I used to get called, because I'm from Germany, half of me is the K word. But, you know, you say things that you couldn't imagine saying now, and that's the point. I think those things, when you look online, are starting to come out again, and I think that's the dangerous thing.
Peter, was this a one-off?
No. I mean...
How often would you be targeted?
We were in the same class. I think we were practically neighbouring desks because we were seated in alphabetical order. This was absolute, whenever he saw me, it was almost like a kind of gut reflex when he saw me. And I was very struck by an interview that a classmate gave to The Guardian the other day, in which he said, I don't understand how Peter just took it, why he didn't react. And I think I just learned to throw a kind of protective cloak over myself and ignore him. And I kind of found my own tribe at school, and it wasn't all bad. So I kind of like got on with my life apart from Farage. But, you know, that experience marked me. And, you know, anti-Semitism is often called the oldest hatred. And when I think of the oldest hatred, it's Nigel Farage's face that I absolutely see in front of me. I mean, I'd like to just pick up on this thing of, yes, it was the 70s. It was a different time. You're absolutely right. But, and that, you know, words like, I don't know if I want to even say them on air, but the K word, the Y word, the Jews, the P word. Those were being thrown around. But I think Nigel Farage was of a completely different order. The regularity, the intention with which he did this to so many pupils of different races.
The singing of the song, you know, that horrendous.
The singing of which song?
The Gas Them All thing. He used to regularly sing that at school, and it's horrendous. I don't want to say it in breakfast television.
Did you have a kind of rules about the assemblies you attended? Did the Jewish pupils go to Christian assembly in the school?
There was a choice. So I would actually go because my friends, my main friends were not necessarily Jewish. So I didn't go to Jewish assembly. Another story has come out last week, I think, about another Jewish pupil, younger than me, who remembers Farage and his pals waiting outside Jewish assembly to taunt and bait the kids coming out.
Nigel Farage says that he didn't say any of these things with intent. But standing outside the Jewish assembly to say things about the Nazis feels like it has some intent.
A great deal of intent, and I think it's also
regular.
Yeah, and the targeting of other students of ethnic minorities waiting at the school gates. Again, this is, I'm regurgitating reporting that's been done elsewhere.
We should put to you what Nigel Farage said to us last night, because we were in contact responding to the allegations. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage said, "I can categorically say that the stories being told about me from 50 years ago are not true." So he is saying that the stories the two of you are saying to us today are not true.
I mean, 50 years ago, he was 11. I mean, my maths isn't that good, but I know that isn't 50 years ago. So I think you've got to look at that as yes, it's 48 years, but also when he's 14, 15, 16, 17, when the issue of the prefect nomination came up, all the way up to 18. I mean, it's not just 50 years ago. I think.
And he says that the two of you are politically motivated.
I don't have any political affiliations at all.
Neither do I. And, you know, I suppose if you really sort of dug deep down with me, I would say, yes, there's not a political, but a deeply personal motivation, which is I do not want to see a school bully become my prime minister. And I think that probably goes for all 20 plus people who've spoken out about his behavior at school.
Peter, Jean-Pierre, thank you.
So I wanted to play the whole of that, well, not the whole of it, but almost all of it to you, because I think it's really important to understand who this man is. And if he's going to be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, then we need to understand who he was as a kid, as an adolescent, and I think who he's always been. I don't think this leopard changed his spots. I really don't. Like, he is who he's always been, and he is, I would argue, a racist and a man who is very, very divisive. And he, you know, these people who have experienced him firsthand are like, I don't want this man to be prime minister. I don't want the playground bully and, you know, racist bully to become prime minister. So anyway, I just thought I would share that with you. Now, another big guy in reform is a guy called Richard Tice, and I love that Richard Tice just gave this big speech, and there were some young people there. It looks like it might be at a university. Talked in terms of connections to Russia here. So I just want to play you this.
Good afternoon, my name's Will. Question for you is, dissuade me that it's not worrying that you and your colleagues did not spot someone taking bribes from Russia, as is Nathan Gill, in your
It might even be a school, actually, rather than he looks too young to be at uni. But anyway, I love the fact you've got a whole bunch of young people here going to town on this guy and like talking in terms that really need to be discussed, which is your connections, your party's connections to Russia. That needs to be sorted out. Anyway, just a pet peeve of mine. So I hope that there will be a formal investigation into Russian interference into the UK political landscape. Right. I'm going to rush through some American stuff now because I think it's important and we need to. Yeah, the audio wasn't great on that last one, but basically he essentially said, you know, can you answer for your connections to Russia, your party's connections to Russia, blah, 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 and all of these young people cheering, which gives me hope because there's this at least understanding in that particular context that there is a connection between reform and Russia, or there seems to be. Right, going to go on to American politics. I'm going to start with Donald Trump the other day having a weird hour. So Trump made approximately 400 posts in the past hour, as it was on December the 2nd, on Truth Social, that included posts like this. And they weren't just like, they were nuts posts. Some of them were littered with like typos. Others were just reposts of outright conspiracy theories. You had AI generated videos that were completely untrue being spread, and just absolute torrents of insanity. Just incredible. President Trump has posted hundreds of times in the last 2 hours, says this source. Here is a screen recording of the post. The video is nearly 5 minutes long. So this is just what he posted in the course of like an hour, maybe two. And you're left thinking, is he doing his posting? Is he doing all of this? Has he not got a country to run? What's he doing? Like, just to repost all that stuff takes an hour to do. You just have to be constantly sat on True Social for 2 hours to post all that stuff. And yet here he is. So, you know, again, then you have questions about who's actually doing all this posting, what's going on. And the stuff that he was reposting was insane. These are just some of the over 150 posts Trump put out on True Social last night. So some people say 400, some say anyway, in the span of an hour, completely insane conspiracy theories. He was clearly having a mental decline episode and was posting whatever came to his mind. It's going to get worse. And again, if you want to pause the video and just, again, you've seen some of these just already, just absolute bonkers stuff that he's talking about, advocating for, and just, I don't know, he's a little bit crazy. Well, before we return to his sort of mental decline, I just want to remind ourselves of what's going on with Pete Hegseth. I can't see that Pete Hegseth is going to last the next couple of weeks. I think you're going to get Dan Driscoll coming in and taking over the Pentagon. It is clear to me that either the destruction of the boats in the Caribbean is murder or they're war crimes. There is no other option. They are illegal either way. Shashant Joshi here says an exhaustive and utterly damning assessment, legal assessment in Just Security. Unlawful orders and killing shipwrecked boat strike survivors, an expert backgrounder. Quote, in sum, there is simply no plausible argument that the reported killing of 2 survivors clinging to the burning wreckage of their stricken vessel could be anything other than an extrajudicial killing. In other words, it's murder. And the trouble is, you know, it's not getting easier for Hegseth, because even people like Judge Napolitano, who is now on Napolitano, he's not a 3-colored ice cream. Napolitano, he was basically a Fox News anchor, now on Newsmax. He's now coming out and saying things like this.
Pleasure to say what I'm about to say, because I worked with Pete Hegseth for 7 or 8 years at Fox News. This is an act of a war crime, ordering survivors who the law requires be rescued instead to be murdered. There's absolutely no legal basis for it. Everybody along the line who did it, from the Secretary of Defense to the Admiral to the people who actually pulled the trigger, should be prosecuted for a war crime for killing these 2 people.
And who? That is Judge Napolitano. Like, this is right-wing information space supreme here, saying that the whole chain of command should be prosecuted for a war crime. And now you've got that video that Senator Kelly and Jason Crow and Lisa Slotkin and others came out and had that video saying you don't need to fulfill orders that are illegal. Just to remind you of the rules, Then you had the pushback from the MAGA type saying that Senator Kelly, and we've got Steve Bannon on record saying he needs to be recalled and court-martialed and we need to get rid of him straight away. The reason why they wanted that to be shut down is because those guys knew what was going on and knew that there was going to be some pushback here. And here is your pushback. And it is not looking good for Pete Hegseth when you've got Napolitano there, and now here you've got Rand Paul, although he doesn't always agree with the Republicans because he's more of a libertarian, coming out and saying this.
In this sense, it looks to me like they're trying to pin the blame on somebody else and not them. There's a very distinct statement was said on Sunday. Secretary Hegseth said he had no knowledge of this and it did not happen. It was fake news. It didn't happen. And then the next day from the podium of the White House, they're saying it did happen. So either he was lying to us on Sunday or he's incompetent and didn't know it had happened. Do we think there's any chance that on Sunday, the Secretary of the Defense did not know there had been a second strike?
And of course, we also now understand, we understood before, because he previously admitted that he was there watching it live. So he's on record saying, I was watching it live. So the idea that he doesn't know about it, so he's either lying or he's incompetent. He's definitely lying. So he's come out and denied all this. So he is in super trouble. But now listen to Megyn Kelly, who, remember, she is someone that was insulted by Trump back in Trump 1.0, before Trump 1.0, when she was moderating a debate and he talked about her being on a period or whatever it was. And she went a bit off him and now is to double down on being super supportive of Donald Trump. Here she is saying totally egregious things.
So I really do kind of not only want to see them killed in the water, whether they're on the boat or in the water, but I'd really like to see them suffer. I would like Trump and Hegseth to make it last a long time so that they lose a limb and bleed out a little. Like, I'm really having a difficult time ginning up sympathy for these guys who 10 seconds earlier almost got taken out by the initial bomb, but because they managed to get ejected, a little too soon, had to be taken out in the water. I realize legally it may make a difference, but truly, Mark, this is a tough case to really gin up the sympathies of the American people. Yeah. So no, because actually that boat had 11 people on, and people are now starting to outright recognize that drug smuggling boats don't have 11 people on. And it's very likely that even if it was involved in drug smuggling, it was also involved in people smuggling. And there's every chance that there were innocent people on board that boat of 11 people that was hit on that 2nd of September strike. That's agreed. Whatever. I mean, her position there is unconscionable. It is evil. I want those people to suffer as much as possible. There is no evidence yet presented that they were definitely drug smugglers anyway. And even if they were, that is pretty callous. So, incredible situation here. Now, Mark Kelly, you had that video that Mark Kelly and other Democrats produced that was kind of saying you don't have to follow laws that are illegal. Steve Bannon here says, here's a plan. Russia is a devoutly Christian nation and was the only true ally in World War II. They stopped the Ottoman Turks, Napoleon, Hitler. Meanwhile, the feckless Western countries collapsing in front of us want us to counter. No, recall Kelly today. So he's involved with all this. Senator Mark Kelly needs to be recalled and then court-martialed and then fucking shot at dawn or whatever he wants. He's also saying, and by the way, Russia's a wonderful nation and they used to be our friend. They're a devoutly Christian nation. By the way, they're not. All the statistics show you that they're not. And yeah, you've got Steve Bannon just saying pretty crazy things. Shifting to a slightly different subject here. I just want to show you Thomas Massie here indicating a fairly unreadable bit of the Epstein files released here, redacted.
This one's not readable. It's completely redacted. For the most part, the first 50 pages. This one's not readable.
I figure that's what we're going to see when it comes to the actual released Epstein files eventually. But then we're going to go from Epstein files to this. This was a cabinet meeting yesterday, so we're going to get back to
security, and
we're going to get back to Trump's health here. I just want to cover a lot of ground in this kind of section. This is another one of these cabinet meetings where they go around and everyone obsequiously fawns over Trump, and it's sickening.
But get a load of this. This takes it to a new level. This is the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem.
Worked hard doing security, and they have been absolutely fantastic. Sir, you made it through hurricane season without a hurricane. Yeah. And so FEMA, you kept the hurricanes away. So we appreciate that. And FEMA is deploying resources and dollars 150% fast.
So you kept the hurricanes away. You kept the hurricanes away. We appreciate that. Everyone laughs. I mean, but she didn't sound like she was being particularly jokey there. She just carried on plowing through. Like, oh, right. Okay. So now we're congratulating Trump on stopping hurricanes, are we? Okay. Jesus. So Trump keeps falling asleep. He fell asleep, caught on camera falling asleep at the lunch table in Mar-a-Lago. And he fell asleep in the Oval Office the other day. He fell asleep in the cabinet meeting that you just saw from. While Marco Rubio was talking about Ukraine, he fell asleep. The poor guy's been tuckered out, says Adam Kinzinger. All that starting work at noon will get to you. He's got those plasters on, so clearly, you know, he's still taking intravenous something, and very tired-looking eyes there. So Trump falls asleep again during a meeting. So this is him while Marco Rubio is talking about Ukraine. Trump fell asleep last night. And you're like, how often did the Republicans talk about Joe Biden, sleepy Joe Biden? Donald Trump talk about sleepy Joe Biden. Joe Biden never fell asleep like this in public, certainly as often as Donald Trump is doing every week at the moment. Trump falls asleep again during a meeting on live television. If Joe Biden had done this, the media would have turned it into a week-long crisis. But with this clown, they shrug it off because he gives them the clicks and fatten their wallets. Total failures. The media is just not holding this guy to account. I say that, although there was an article in the New York Times, shorter days, signs of fatigue, Trump faces realities of aging in office. Trump went mental at this. He did not like this article, but it's absolutely on point. In the realities of Trump aging in office. So he appears to doze off during events. We've seen that. We've literally seen that. His public appearances mostly occur during a short window between noon and 5 p.m. He sits while others stand. He covers his bruises with makeup, and he had an MRI scan that he tried to hide from the public, and he won't tell anyone what the MRI was of. Now, from that New York Times article, there's actually some data. In 2017, the first year of his first term, Mr. Trump's scheduled events started at 10:31 a.m. in the morning on average. By contrast, Mr. Trump in his second term has started scheduled events in the afternoon on average at 12:08 p.m. He has shifted his day forward or back 2 hours. Trump's total official appearances have decreased by 39%. He's doing pretty much 40% fewer appearances in public than he used to do in Trump 1.0. Now, he had a meltdown when asked which part of his body his MRI was for. It's a very easy question. Instead, Trump refused to answer, but denied it was his brain, and then said the two female journalists wouldn't pass the cognitive test. Like, just unbelievable.
I want to have it released. I'll release it.
Please, can you tell us what they were looking at?
For what, releasing?
No. What part of your body was the MRI looking at?
I have no idea. It was just an MRI. What part of the body? It wasn't the brain because I took a cognitive test and I aced it. I got a perfect mark, which you would be incapable of doing. Goodbye, everybody. You too.
He's such a child. You're being capable of doing, like, everyone knows that cognitive. They're like, point at a camel. Like, remember these 5 animals? Like, come on, mate. Like, honestly. But me personally, JP, I've had, I don't know, probably 10 MRIs now. I had recent MRI on my prostate, where I went into the hospital knowing that I had an issue with my, well, no, they were going to find out whether I had an issue with my prostate. And in the end, it found out that I did. And I've had biopsies. I've got very low level cancer, but it's all fine. It just, you know, it'll be monitored. They're not actually giving any treatment. But the point is, I knew I was going in for an MRI. Like, you had the MRIs are pretty substantial, right? You're in there with your headphones on and maybe earplugs and headphones because it's pretty noisy, and they're like, you know, you need to sit still, particularly here. You need to sit still because that's where lie still because that's where we're MRIing. Like, there's no chance. There's no chance that this man doesn't know what he had an MRI on. I've had MRI on my prostate and probably 9 MRIs on my brain and spinal cord because I've got multiple sclerosis. And I know I'm going in to get an MRI because they're worried about me having multiple sclerosis or me having prostate cancer. Like, so I know why I'm having it. You don't go, oh, Donald, can you just lie in this big machine for an hour while we do loads of MRI scans? Yeah, why are you doing that? Oh, just no reason, just for shits and giggles. Just lie down. Well, what are you getting the imaging for? Like what? Oh, everything, nothing. Your left finger, I don't know. We're randomizing it actually. Oh, what's it going to be today? Is it going to be an MRI on his brain? No, because he answered those questions on camels. Or is it going to be his heart? Or is it going to be, oh, we don't know because it's totally it's absolute nonsense, right? So he's basically lying, and it should be very clear to him, one assumes, as to why he had an MRI. But the idea is that this guy is the president of the United States. There needs to be communication there. Absolutely incredible. As someone says, look, I recently had a colonoscopy. No way of knowing where that's going. Yeah, it's just, come on. We know why we go into hospital and have these things. Okay. So Pam Bondi here. What's this talking about? Oh yes. So now we're going to move on to the National Guardsman that was shot. One has sadly died. So here we have Pam Bondi confirming, because the 2 National Guardsmen got shot in Washington DC. The Trump administration will be flooding as many American cities as possible with the military. Honestly, if this doesn't like scare you with potential militarized fascism, I don't know what will.
Working hand in hand with Secretary Noem, Homeland Security. Director Patel has already arrested 500 suspected terrorists since January 20th. We're working hand in hand with Pete Hegseth. And yes, we are bringing in our National Guard to every city we possibly can. Who needs our help? And that's a lot of them. We're tied up, as you know, in a lot of court hearings right now.
We're sending them into all the cities that we possibly can. All the cities that we possibly can. We're going to be flooding in troops. Well, my goodness. Now, speaking of that kind of activity, turns out Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary for the White House, her sister-in-law was detained by ICE. Ow. I bet she was released pretty quickly. I bet Caroline Leavitt pulled some strings there. How that is hitting home rather closely. Now, in terms of the military and Trump giving respect to the military, this is what House Republicans said, but actually loads of different, including I think the White House put out a picture, this picture here that you see, on Thanksgiving. House Republicans are praying for our men and women in uniform who sacrifice holidays with their families. Thank you for keeping us safe and protecting our freedom. Now, in Trump 1.0, there was a picture I think that he had at Thanksgiving where he visited the military. They've just trotted this out again. He was playing golf on Thanksgiving by all accounts, and this never actually happened. So Donald Trump he himself just returned to the United States after spending a great Thanksgiving with our courageous American warriors in Afghanistan. So that's what he did in 2019, and that's where the picture was from. And then he you've got the Republican official accounts and whatnot sending this out as if that's what he'd done. So we need to be really careful. And actually, there's something else I'm going to show you. This is what I was going to show you in the UK section. There was this, and actually, if you go and watch the videos of this, it's fascinating. If above is a thumbnail to a right-wing YouTuber here that went around London saying, look what London's like now. You've got Arabic writing up here. You're a guy in a balaclava who's brown skin guy in a balaclava looking really blah blah blah, and that was the thumbnail to the video. Turns out that this is now, during the video, he's actually there, and the guy on the bike is someone he knows him from YouTube and says, I like your stuff, and he said, do you want me to do a wheelie for you? Does a wheelie for him. That's the original photo with like actual English signs. Then he has changed the signage to Arabic writing, put a balaclava on this guy using like AI or whatever, and claim that it's absolutely terrible in London at the moment. We are being bombarded with fake imagery telling us how bad society is at the moment, when it so often isn't as bad as is being claimed. So just be careful online. This is happening an awful lot, and unfortunately, you know, we're being hoodwinked in many ways, sometimes quite subtle. Going back to Trump and golf on Thanksgiving, taxpayers have now shelled out nearly $71 million for Trump's golf hobby since he retook office in January, with his second term total on pace to break $300 million. So if you're wondering about why isn't money being spent on this, well, it's because it's being spent on that, and that is golf. Dear America, the US Treasury posted a $284.4 billion deficit in October, the worst opening month of any fiscal year in history. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is spanking it all up the wall playing golf. Here, it turns out the Biden economy, though, on the other hand, was pretty damn good. So this is Steve Ratner. In 2025, payroll growth has slowed to less than half the pace of 2024. Hiring particularly fell off a cliff after Liberation Day. And that is the data from monthly payrolls growth. It is not looking nearly as healthy as it previously was. So yeah, and now we have the national, so CBS News reports, and this is staggering if true. CBS News is reporting that the National Park Service is going to start charging the millions of international tourists who visit US national parks each year $100 per person to enter some of the most popular sites, while leaving them out of the fee-free days that will be reserved for American residents. Wow. So the United States, says Phillips O'Brien, seems to be bending over backwards to drive tourists away, and tourism last summer was a disaster. Why would you be charging that much money? Well, it's because you're not making money in tax receipts that you need, other than tariffs, which are extractions, which are taxes directly on the American population. And then just the final stuff for you now, the last nugget for you, talking about money and grifting. And I talked to you in my video earlier about the peace negotiations and how Jared Kushner being involved in peace negotiations is only a sign of grifting on behalf of the Trump family. Senile Satan, Con Jr. and Fredo announced their phone in June. So do you remember they announced a golden Trump phone until it was found out that actually it was a Chinese phone? Then they say, well, actually, we're going to just rebadge. And they're like, oh, we're going to make it all in America eventually. And this is at the same time they're whacking tariffs on, and they're actually selling a Chinese Trump phone, but whacking tariffs on everyone else. Anyway, they dropped the claim about it being onshored into the US, and that it would eventually be fully made in the US. They dropped that claim. Now it turns out that no one's received the phone, right? So they announced their phone in June, promised delivery in August, and remember it's November. No, December. So they're supposed to be delivered in August to commemorate a decade since Satan came down the escalator, since Trump came down the escalator. Not one phone has been delivered, and good luck getting a refund. They took over 590,000 deposits, totaling $59 million, and they're refusing to refund people. So these Trump gold Trump phones, that 590,000 people paid a $100 deposit, just the deposit, mind, on, still haven't been delivered after they were being told that they would be on by September. So NBC, who bought one, tried to call the company, and there's no phone number, only an email. They asked if they could get a refund and were told no. So NBC have looked into that. I can't believe it. And at the same time as that's controversially conning people out of money, Trump is launching another grift. Trump vodka. I think I finally understand Trump, says Roman Sheremeter. For him, everything is business. Crypto, Trump coin, Trump vodka, Trump Bible, Trump perfumes. Oh, and the peace negotiations with Russia and the extortion of extracting money from the minerals deal with Ukraine. But anyway, that's another aside. All a way to make money. He treats American taxpayers the same way, as assets to be exploited. Even the so-called peace deal with Russia is a business opportunity for him and his family. Well, there you go. That was my point. And his crusade against Venezuela, just another venture with profit potential. If you voted for him, guys, if any of you are still out there that are watching this, watching me as I rant about Trump, because I've got TDS, You need to explain this. You need to explain all of this. And just, you know, if you still think it was the right choice and he's a good man, he's the right man and he's doing a good job and blah, 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 I'm fairly sure we would struggle to have a debate about this because I think we'd just be speaking different languages. Anyway, that's a bit of Trump for you. Now we're back to just me and speaking to you guys and thanking you for your awesomeness. So remember to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much to all the people who've been reminding others of that. We do have a atpgeo.com/donate, a website where you can, or a link where you will be sent to our latest fundraiser. At the moment, it's Jiggers Paw, and anyone that helps out with that will be really appreciated by those who receive the aid from Jiggers Paw. So thank you. What else do we have? Wizard of Ooze saying the joke is that Reform didn't collect and pay VAT on their shirt merch, and HMRC are after them for it, and they want to run the Treasury. This is true. They didn't even understand the HMRC tax or the tax rules for selling their own merch, and they owe, I can't remember how much it is, but they owe all the VAT on selling merch that they haven't paid, and they're the people that are going to be running the country, running the Treasury. They have every reform council that they've taken over, they said we're going to cut council taxes, and I think I'm right in saying every single one is either raising their council taxes or going to raise their council taxes, and they're struggling to answer why there's a further 11 million, I think, added to the black hole in Kent County Council. It's like, these are the guys you want to run the country? Okay, fair enough. Don't say you haven't been warned. Thank you to AJ Simo. Thanks, mate, for your support, and 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. That's really, really super generous, and even more generous Captain Obvious with 10 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks to all of you, AJ Simo, Captain Obvious, Julian Roster, Wizard of Ooze, Johnny Nebregard. You are all so incredibly generous all the time. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And just seeing if there was any other comments that Betty Pie had highlighted. King Raccoon: allies must allocate at least $1 billion every month for US weapons for Ukraine, said NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte ahead of the North Atlantic Council meeting. Yeah, I'm probably going to talk about that in my next military aid video, but yeah, thanks for highlighting that one, King Raccoon. I forgive you for your egregious jumper slander. Thank you very much to everyone. Really do appreciate your support. Take care. I hope you've had a nice time in the live chat, speaking amongst yourselves. If you weren't in a live chat, you should have been. Take care, and I'll see you all soon.